Nagorno Karabakh. Recently, we had seen Nagorno Karabakh in news. Why in news? Recently, Azerbaijan launched a military operation in the disputed Nagorno Karabakh region. The operation is part of a long standing dispute between Azerbaijan and Armenia over the region. What is the history of the conflict? Nagorno Karabakh region is in the South Caucasus region between Eastern Europe and the West Asia, the transcontinental region between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. Azerbaijan is a country in Asia that is bordered by Russia, Georgia, Armenia, and Iran. Towards east is bordered by the Caspian Sea. Armenia, a landlocked country bordered by Turkey, Georgia, Azerbaijan. Nagorno-Karabakh, known as Artsakh by Armenians, is a landlocked mountainous area. It is located within the international borders of Azerbaijan. It is internationally recognized as a part of Azerbaijan, but its inhabitants are predominantly ethnic Armenians and with Azeri minority. The conflict between Azeris and Armenians goes back a century. Nagorno-Karabakh, which was once a part of the Armenian kingdom, has been ruled by several empires over the centuries: the Ottomans, the Persians, and the Russians. During the World War I, Ottomans attacked the South Caucasus with the help of Azeris. They targeted ethnic Armenians during this attack. Armenia is majority Christian, while Azerbaijan is a majority Muslim, and the conflict between both the countries gradually broke into a war in 1920. Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia later became Soviet republics. Soon after both countries became part of the Soviet Republic in 1921, Nagorno Karabakh was made an autonomous oblast in Azerbaijan's territory. When the Soviet Union disintegrated, fighting again broke out between the countries. In 1988, the National Assembly voted to dissolve the region's autonomous status and join Armenia. Armenia had taken control of Nagorno-Karabakh and handed it to Armenian rebels. Nagorno-Karabakh have their own government which has enjoyed close links to Armenians but has not been officially recognized as Armenia or any other country. The self-declaration of independence by Nagorno-Karabakh in 1991 after collapse of the USSR resulted in a war between two countries. This resulted in a conflict. This war lasted till a ceasefire agreement was reached in 1994, mediated by Russia, leaving Nagorno-Karabakh and some surrounding areas under Armenian control. But international borders for the countries were not demarcated. Since then, Organization for Security and Cooperation in the Europe Minsk Group have engaged Azerbaijan and Armenia extensively to resolve the conflict. A war again broke out between the two countries in 2016, with no resolution being arrived at. In 2020, Azerbaijan launched the Second Karabakh War. Russia brokered a peace deal and provided for up to 1,960 Russian peacekeepers stationed in the region. Under the deal, Azerbaijan was handed all of the territories surrounding Karabakh. That left ethnic Armenian in Karabakh with a small region. The deal provided for the Russian peacekeepers to deploy to Karabakh to guard the only left road linking the enclave with Armenia, the so-called Lakin Corridor, and construction of a new route along the corridor. Azerbaijan pledged to guarantee the safety of traffic along the corridor in both directions. Fighting continued to break out after the ceasefire. Azeri civilians began a blockade of the Lakin corridor. In 2022, Azeri blocked the corridor, closing Karabakh to all, except Russian peacekeepers and Red Cross convoys. Azerbaijan denied blocking the corridor. The crisis on the corridor strained ties between Russia and Armenia, which has repeatedly called for Moscow to enforce the November 2020 ceasefire and open the corridor, while Moscow has said Armenia is refusing peace talks with Azerbaijan. Who is organizing the current peace talks and where do they stand? Turkey has close ties to Azerbaijan, while Russia is allied with Armenia, although it also has good relations with Azerbaijan. The violent border clashes between Armenia and Azerbaijan have raised fears of another war in the Caucasus. The countries had fought a war in 2020 over the disputed Nagorno Karabakh, which Azerbaijan made gains before Russia forced a ceasefire. The crisis broke out at a time when Russia, Armenia's security ally, has been struggling to hold its gains in Ukraine. Armenia is a member of the Russia led Collective Security Treaty Organization (CSTO), whose NATO like charter stipulates that an attack against one member could be treated as an attack against all. Armenia had turned to Russia for help. but Moscow's response was rather cautious. It called for de escalation and claimed that it had brokered another ceasefire. Armenia has complained loudly that Russia's war in Ukraine has distracted it from what Moscow itself says is its role as the guarantor of security in the South Caucasus. Unlike in the 1990s, Azerbaijan now looks economically and politically stronger. In the 2020 conflict, it got military and diplomatic assistance from Turkey, while Russia was reluctant to get dragged into the conflict on behalf of Armenia. Now, Russia's ability to project power in its neighborhood appears to be further limited on account of Ukraine. On the other side, gas rich Azerbaijan, which still has backing of Turkey, is being quoted by the European Union for increased gas supplies. These regional developments seem to have emboldened Azerbaijan. Russia will find it difficult to retain its influence in Central Asia and Caucasus if it continues to ignore Armenia. At the same time, getting dragged into another battlefront would be challenging. A conflict in the Caucasus would further destabilize the global energy markets, hurting all economies, particularly energy starved Europe. For Turkey, which is trying to balance between Russia and the West over Ukraine, another war in its neighborhood would further complicate its foreign policy choices. Despite the 2020 ceasefire, clashes have not stopped. With the efforts of the Minsk group remaining largely unsuccessful, Baku saw an opportunity to introduce its own peace proposal, which calls for the mutual recognition of each state's territorial integrity, meaning the recognition of Nagorno Karabakh within Azerbaijan's territory. The European Union, meanwhile, has emerged as a potential peace broker, but the conflict has not resolved. What is India's stand on Nagorno Karabakh region? In 2020, after the conflict broke out, India had said it believes that any resolution of the conflict can only be achieved peacefully through diplomatic negotiations. In this regard, India supports OSCE Minsk Group's continued efforts for a peace resolution of the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. This time after the conflict, India has made it clear on that it encouraged the parties to move forward and ensuring long-term peace and security in the region through dialogue and diplomacy, which includes the safety and well-being of all civilians. India has ties with both Armenia and Azerbaijan. Importantly, the region is central to its plans of connectivity through the South Caucasus region. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, India recognized the independence of Armenia and Azerbaijan and established diplomatic relations. With Armenia, India opened its embassy in 1999 as a treaty relationship. In 2020, Armenia signed a $40 million arms deal with India for the supply of four Swati radars to detect the location of weapons. In 2022, India-Armenia deal to supply the armed forces with Pinaka multi-barrel rocket launchers, anti-tank munitions and ammunition, and warlike stores worth $250 million, viewed as Delhi siding with Armenia. With Armenia, India has a friendship and cooperation treaty signed in 1995, which incidentally would prohibit India from providing military or any other assistance to Azerbaijan. Because of the geographical location of Armenia and Azerbaijan, the region is important as a viable corridor for India's connectivity with Russia and Europe through Central Asia and Iran. Armenia and Azerbaijan are members of the INSTC, International North-South Transport Corridor. India is keen to develop. India supports Armenia's proposal to include Iran's Chahbar port in INSTC. Tensions in the region directly impact India's plan to bypass Pakistan as the gateway to Europe and Russia. Armenia publicly endorses India's position on the resolution of the Kashmir issue on a bilateral basis and supports India's aspiration for a permanent seat in the expanded United Nations Security Council. Armenia extends its support to India on Kashmir issue, whereas Azerbaijan not only opposes but also promotes Pakistan's narrative on this issue. In the case of Azerbaijan, ONGC OEL has made investments in an oil field project in Azerbaijan, and GAIL is exploring the possibilities of cooperations in LNG. As an ally of Azerbaijan, Pakistan has been supplying men and military hardware to assist the former in its conflicts. The purpose of seizing Armenian territory forcefully is to gain unhindered access to Turkey, Azerbaijan, Pakistan, and the entire Turkic-oriented axis of nations up to China. The conflict is essentially a conflict between two international principles: the principle of territorial integrity advocated by Azerbaijan and the principle of the right to self-determination invoked by Nagorno-Karabakh, supported by Armenia. Let's hope that the two countries must make a peace agreement over the region and ensure calm in the troubled mountains of the Nagorno-Karabakh. Thank you.